How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA.
Hello, you're listening to DNA Today, a genetics podcast and radio show. I'm your host, Kira Deneen. DNA Today informs you on what's happening in the genetic world. During my broadcast here, I educate you, the public, on genetic health topics through event coverage, news stories, book me reviews, and my favorite interviews. Guests include genetic counselors, researchers like today, doctors, patient advocates, and professors. So joining me today to discuss the role genetics play in pain susceptibility is Dr. Erin Young. She is an assistant professor of both the School of Nursing and Genetic and Genomic Sciences at the University of Connecticut. Her career has been focused on studying genetic contributions to pain susceptibility, for which she has published numerous papers sharing her findings. She received her BA at Wesleyan College and her MA and PhD at Kent State University. She also completed 2 postdoctoral fellowships at Texas A&M University and the University of Pittsburgh Center for Pain Research. Thanks so much for coming on the show and talking about pain susceptibilities.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
So, what do we know about the role genetics play in our experience of pain?
Well, so like many of the complex, health conditions, relevant health conditions that we are dealing with, pain is a multigenic disorder. There's a lot of different genetic variants that contribute to pain, and we know that, at about 60% variation between people, who's more sensitive and less sensitive to pain isn't. So, genetics in general plays a big role in our sensitivity as individuals, but any one specific gene, only contributes a small amount.
So we're looking at really multiple genes that are playing a role in this because, as you said, there's a lot of different things that pain's involved in. It's not just one aspect.
Oh, absolutely. It's much more complex than that. And for me, that actually makes it really exciting because it means the answer is not simply, which pain gene. How do these genetic variations convey susceptibility, and how do they work together to determine what individual sort of profile of pain resilience versus pain sensitivity is. And, those complex questions are really exciting because it means you get to multiple methods, multiple approaches to kind of figure out what's happening in the way that the world works.
And so have you found that there's a certain, genes that do get inherited from our parents that, will affect our pain susceptibility? Is this something that can be inherited, or is that something we don't even know yet?
You absolutely inherit your pain sensitivity and pain susceptibility. I mean, like, your risk for developing chronic pain or for having pain is really, really high, compared to someone else who with the exact same disease might have a lower pain rating. So, you do inherit that from your parents. And we kind of know this already, right? Because we think of being sort of, when I have pain tolerance, people will say, and we see that kind of run in families. So I think we've had a general understanding that this is a phenomenon. And now we're really starting to tease apart how that works at the biological level.
And have you also found kind of, stepping back away from families, differences among races and sexes?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. There's not only a difference in pain sensitivity, so how sensitive someone is to a very high temperature. Races, there are differences in how the skin actually conducts that temperature, pigmentation and skin thickness and that kind of thing. But and we see that, or in ethnicity, and we actually do see that there are differences between groups. We also know that there are some groups that are that have more, or higher representation of alleles within genes that are at risk for developing chronic pain conditions. So the same thing that we see with disorders, monogenic disorders like sickle cell disease, in that populations who are from Mediterranean or African heritage tend to have a higher representation of the mutation that causes sickle cell. You can also see that there are the risk alleles, or the things that you more likely to have pain risk, are sometimes overrepresented in different racial and ethnic groups. We do know that there are differences between sexes, and I'd say that this is probably one of the best researched areas of pain research. And those differences are in part due to things you might expect, right? The effects of sex hormones and that kind of There's also differences in the fundamental ways that and females, and I say males and females because a lot of this research is done in models and then translated into human subjects. So it's kind of, multi-level, is that there's fundamental differences in the way that they transmit pain information to it. And also how the inflammatory response, sort of goes forward in the cells that are involved there. So all of those differences can contribute to different sensitivity and susceptibility to chronic pain. We know females are much more likely to, or women are much more likely have chronic painful disorders like fibromyalgia and irritable bowel syndrome. We're sort of teasing apart why that is the case. Some of it may be due to reporting, because, perhaps women are more likely to really engage in healthcare utilization. I don't know that that's necessarily all of it, but it could be some of it. But some of it is related to fundamental biological processes that differ males and females. And that can be superimposed on the genetic piece, so that there are some, and actually we can talk a little bit about this, there's some genetic effects. So where variations within one gene seem to affect pain sensitivity or susceptibility, but it only does so in one sex or the other. So that there's sex gene interactions that, get really exciting, right? Because it means that genetic risk is only exposed if you are in where it seems to be, released from inhibition, or where it seems to be expressed. So to me, those kind of complex interactions get really exciting.
So you're saying that someone could have kind of the genetic mutation but not express it. So genetically they're the same, but in terms of symptoms, they're a little bit different.
Absolutely. So there's, which is an arginine vasopressin receptor that seems to be mostly involved in pain modulation in males, while you might have the risk allele. If you're female, it doesn't really seem in the same way. And one of the things that's interesting about that is that it means that potentially there are sex-specific, genetic-focused ways of treating pain that we have begun to really develop yet, right? Because now we're talking about really precise healthcare delivery to treat pain, developed just for one of the sexes, and all those who are carrying a specific mutation or a specific allele or variant. And so that is actually really cool, because it can start to actually do the precision healthcare delivery talking about. It just takes a long time, to translate those findings from the lab into healthcare. I mean, for a number of good reasons, but you don't want people running off willy-nilly. But so I think that that actually is where we're going. You'll be able to really tailor interventions for pain based on sex and life history of trauma, race, ethnicity. All of those things would go into it, so that you could really have a tailored, specific, treatment for the complex profile of who you are.
And I'm sure in terms of, taking in race, sex, and as you said, kind of previous personal history, different diagnoses of different diseases and disorders would also help play a role. And the more information you have, the more you can tailor someone's healthcare to that, which is, known as precision healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. And we are really, at this point, we're pretty good at keeping people alive and treating their diseases, right? We're getting better and better at that all the time. Even things that, 2 decades ago would have been terminal illnesses or illnesses that would have greatly reduced the life expectancy for a person. We're pretty good at extending life. What we're talking about, in my research at least, is figuring out how to improve the quality of that life that is now preserved by decreasing pain burden and preventing patients from developing chronic pain conditions that, they have a major impact on not only productivity, but also the ability for people to interact with their families and their quality of life. So we're really talking about, fundamental issues of reducing human suffering. We just got to figure out how to do it better.
And it just affects so many people, because you're not just focused and doing research that's only on one specific disorder. You're looking at things that really have potentially broad implications with, everybody experiences physical pain in life to some degree. So this is really such a wide scope kind of perspective and angle that you have.
Well, and it is. And one of the things that I think is good and bad about being in research is that you get to choose your path, right? And I don't have a favorite kind of pain. That sounds weird, but I don't have a favorite pain type, because I think all of them offer us little insights into how pain in general works, right? Pain that comes from inflammation is slightly different than pain that comes from, say, a surgical procedure where you have tissue damage, or even from, inflammation within the body, like in the bowel, which is something we've been focusing on quite a bit recently. I think each one of those can help us to tease apart some fundamental truths about the way that pain works in general. And then we can also start to kind of tease apart what the specific pain mechanisms are, pain susceptibilities are. We've published on a lot of different kinds of pain, including things like pain after spinal cord injury, as well as pain with no clear known cause. So things like irritable bowel syndrome, a disorder of the bowel. It's abdominal pain disorder, but when you look at, the diagnostics for that, in order to have irritable bowel syndrome, you can't have a disease because there's no, occult inflammation or disorder within the bowel. Something's not right, but it's unclear why those pain signals are being sent instead of normal, bowel function signals. And so, I'm interested in pain disorders that don't have a known cause, but also pain that results from things where we know what the disease or injury is that precipitate them.
And you're kind of able to kind of group these types of pains into different areas to kind of be able to understand them a little bit better, and kind of, you were saying pain from surgery versus a pain of just like a chronic illness or something like that, and see what's similar, see what's different, to really be able to understand these mechanisms a little bit better.
We use not only different pain types, but we look at them at different levels. So one of my favorite things about my research program is that we then really strive to translate that into the human condition. We find a population with a similar, type of injury or disease process, and when we look to see if those genetic variations or similar genetic variations in the animal model actually translate to human clinical populations. I mean, that to me are things that we get to do.
And there's just so much to study within this field. And one thing that I'm curious about is we've talked about kind of the genetic factors that play a role in pain susceptibility, but are we aware of kind of more environmental factors? There's always kind of that, thing between genes, environment, and everything like that.
Environment plays a huge in pain sensitivity, and anyone who's ever played in an athletic event and hurt themselves knows how this works, right? So you're running down the field and you twist your ankle incredibly badly, and yet in the moment that pain is not really perceived to be that severe, right? It's not until you get off the field, sit down on the bench, that all of a sudden you are like the person is in agony. Or any kid that's ever fallen off their bike, they don't cry till they see the blood, right, coming out of their knee that's been. And that's, kind of a general effect of the environment. Distraction plays a huge role in pain. This is that they've started to integrate distraction techniques into for kids who are both, but also in the clinic. They use an iPad, they might use a game, they might use, a craft to distract, or having either, a low-level painful procedure, or, vaccinations, or IV placement. I mean, those things are, painful to little kids. So they've really started to use these not only in kids, but also in adults, and then in the aged population who, have more healthcare utilization overall. But so distraction and attention, mindfulness meditation, where you are really, kind of using your mind to escape the moment, right? Thinking, using it as a way of, almost as a way of distraction, but without an external stimulus, like an iPad or something. That is really helpful for reducing pain, and also for decreasing stress, because one of the things that happens, especially in the healthcare environment, is when people are in pain, it's also stressful to them, which can negatively affect their health outcomes. So, we try to those processes. One of the things that we've studied quite a bit has been lifetime history of an individual might affect different pain status. People who have a lifetime history of trauma, either because of the death of a loved one, or because of physical abuse or neglect or whatever, if they have a history of traumatic events in their life, they're more likely to have to rate painful stimuli as being. We have to understand those processes before we can turn them off, right? Because we know that if they experience greater pain later on as a result, sensitized or extra sensitive because of their traumatic events, then they might be at increased risk for developing chronic pain conditions, because now the pain that would have been lower level is now bigger, right? And now it could increase. Pain has a negative effect on their long-term health outcomes. So the short answer is yes. The environment plays a big part. It's not just the environment in the moment, experience or of pain. Now it's really kind of this effect of your lifetime experience that sets you up for this pain sensitivity or susceptibility. So that suggests that we have points prior to that we could intervene, right? And that you could sort of become, you could either teach people or intervene in a way that would increase their pain resiliency and decrease their pain if we understand how those processes actually feed into, subsequent pain experience.
And so one thing that you also study is kind of two different pain behaviors of that somatic and visceral. Can you kind of explain what those two terms mean and really the difference between the two?
The somatic and visceral systems are two different sort of areas of the body. They represent two different kinds of processing areas. So the somatic, the bodily system that we think of as being the arms and legs and muscles of the body. The viscera is all the abdominal organs, the stuff on the inside. The visceral organs are just not that well innervated. I want to be distracted every time we have food in our stomach, right? I want to be getting signals about every single thing that happens to us. Whereas with our hands and our skin, the muscles of the body, we do want a lot of moment-to-moment information about that. So there's a difference how much information we get from the somatic system and how much we get from the visceral system. We get pain signals we should only be getting pain signals from the viscera when something is wrong, like pretty badly wrong. You get pain when you have an appendix, right? But normally you couldn't even identify where your appendix is getting any signals from it. And so there's differences in how much detail we get. We also, when we have abdominal pain is like, we think of it as originating in the organs. It's coming from somewhere. We just say my stomach hurts, but in actuality, it could be coming from a bunch of different organs. There's a lot of stuff squeezed in there. And we find that to be really upsetting, right? Visceral pain is one of the things that has a lot of negative affect associated with it, right? We find it to be really, it's almost like it's scarier because you don't have any access to it. If you can see that you've injured yourself and see the injury, like on the somatic system, you can almost, deal with the pain. But because we don't have a window into our abdomens, it's a little disorienting. We really don't like it. It's debilitating. It's awful. And so I was studying somatic pain, hind paw injury, inflammation in the paw, things that look more like, injury or surgical procedures that would result in pain afterward. But now I look a lot at this. So we do a lot of distension of the internal organs. Anything that is a hollow organ, it's made to stretch. And so we can stretch it and see how much your different thresholds for painful responding to that distension. And because we've been so interested in irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel diseases that affect specifically the viscera, we have really moved in that direction most recently. But like I said, I don't have a favorite kind of pain, but that's what I've been most interested in recently.
And just with so much research of in your career and where you focused and everything, how do you see this research being applied and being able to, end game, reduce pain and suffering in patients by really applying this research?
So the translational piece of my research program is for that purpose. And one of the things that is really exciting, we've been looking at a different aspect of that same question and saying which genes are turned on and off, or more or less, within the colorectum of these patients, and how does that relate to their pain? So can we find genes that are, really the volume on them is turned all the way up in patients who have a lot of pain, they have their inflammatory bowel disease flares, versus those who don't have a whole lot of pain, see what the difference is between their patterns of expression. And so we found at least one gene that seems to strongly predict, it predicts about 20% of the variance between patient pain burdens. And the cool thing about that is that we're looking at gene expression within a very localized tissue, right? So this would mean, theoretically, that we could actually treat the gene expression differences, so turn the volume down on those genes that are being highly expressed, and that seems to contribute to pain burden, we could treat that locally within the bowel so that you wouldn't have to have something like opioids or some, global pain treatment. We could actually treat the pain mechanistically, right, rather than just using something, that's a blanket treatment like opioids where you kind of put a damper on the whole system. You could treat the pain at the mechanism level at the location where it's being generated. And then, presumably you would have a lot of effects, a lot less, unintended or off target. And one of the problems that we find with visceral pain in general is that you can't really treat it with opioids because of the gastrointestinal side effects. You've seen these commercials on opioid-induced constipation that have been on recently, and it's a huge problem. So if somebody already has a problem with pain originating in the bowel, and now you give them opioids to treat the pain, but it causes them to be incredibly constipated, which then exacerbates their pain condition, like that's not going to work. So actually, for me, a way that we could free these patients, because we could identify the processes that are the genetic processes that are contributing to burden and treat that instead of just guessing and treating them with something that has, especially right now with the opioid epidemic, everyone's afraid medication, especially kids, giving them to people who have it's going to repeatedly have pain throughout your lifetime. Like I would love to be able to get rid of our need and dependence on treatment. And if we understand these processes that are generating the pain or high pain burden in our patients, then we can target those. And then you don't, struggle with this pharmacological agent that has a high degree of tolerance and also the risk for misdiction. We don't even have to get into that because we're treating the pain biologically, and we're not, we don't have to get into all the other complicated stuff that goes along with treatments that are not really targeted as a mechanism.
And it's just so advanced and really getting down to, as you said, kind of more of the cause rather than just treating symptoms. So it's just very exciting to hear that, these are things that are being researched and being worked on, and we are making progress. And by studying genetics, we can really help people in so many different ways, in healthcare and outside of healthcare. But thank you so much, Dr. Erin Young, for sharing your experience, your expertise in genetic contributions to pain susceptibility. It's a very interesting area, not one that I've really explored too much in. And it's just so interesting to learn kind of all that goes into, the genetic portion of pain and everything like that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I feel like this is the wave of the future. We just got to get the word out.
Definitely, yeah. And you're pretty active on Twitter. People can follow you at Dr. Erin Y. And also, you can learn more on UConn's website, painresearch.uconn.edu. For more information on the show, you can go to dnapodcast.com. I'm on Twitter at DNA Podcast, on Instagram at DNA Radio. And any questions for myself and Dr. Young can be sent in to info@dnapodcast.com, and I can forward them along there. Thanks for listening, guys, and join me next week to learn and discover new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you, and they're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA.